I left my badge on his desk, the one with my name on it, the one he'd had made without my last name because, as he put it, Whitfield is easier for clients to remember anyway. 3 days later, his entire board of directors was on the phone with federal investigators, and I was sitting in a coffee shop in Portland with my hands wrapped around a mug, watching the rain, feeling something I hadn't felt in 6 years. Quiet. Let me back up. I met my husband at a firm retreat in Scottsdale. I was 29, a licensed structural engineer with 4 years at a mid-sized firm in Seattle. He was 41, silver around the temples, the kind of man who knew exactly where to stand in a room so the light hit him right. His name was Whitfield. Everyone called him that. Just the last name, like he was a landmark. He ran Whitfield and Crane Development out of Phoenix, and at that retreat he talked about legacy the way most people talk about weather. Casually. Constantly. He made me feel seen in a way I didn't know I'd been waiting for. He remembered things. The name of my thesis advisor. That I hated cilantro. That I'd wanted to design bridges when I was a kid because I liked the idea of connecting places that couldn't reach each other on their own. We were married 14 months later. I want to be clear about something because I know what people assume. I wasn't naive. I had a master's degree and a career I'd built from nothing. But there's a version of control that doesn't look like control at first. It looks like protection. It looks like you shouldn't have to deal with that, and let me handle this, and you're too talented to be wasting time on billing and client emails. Within 2 years, I had left my firm. It made sense at the time. We'd relocated to Phoenix for his business, and he had a project that needed my expertise, and it was supposed to be temporary. I would consult on Whitfield and Crane projects. I would be credited. I would still be me. I was credited once in a footnote of an internal document as engineering support. 6 years. I designed load-bearing systems for 4 commercial developments worth a combined $340 million. I redesigned a parking structure that his team had spec'd wrong, a mistake that would have failed inspection and cost them the entire River District contract. I caught it at 11:30 on a Tuesday night while he was having dinner with investors. He got the contract, I got a diamond bracelet and a thank you that lasted about 40 seconds. He called me his secret weapon at dinner parties. He said it like a compliment. It wasn't. I didn't know exactly when things shifted in my head. It wasn't a single moment. It was smaller than that. It was the morning I went to pull up a file I'd been working on and realized my access to the shared server had been quietly downgraded. I couldn't modify anything anymore. Just view. When I asked about it, he said the IT guy had been cleaning up permissions. Probably a glitch. He'd look into it. He never looked into it. I started paying attention differently after that. I'd always had a kind of background awareness of the financial structure of the business. I was his wife. I sat across from him at dinner. I heard things. But I'd never really listened the way an engineer listens. Systematically. Looking for load points and stress fractures. What I found over the next 4 months was this. Whitfield and Crane had been awarded 3 public infrastructure contracts through the city of Phoenix, a pedestrian bridge, a library expansion, a community recreation center. All 3 were partially funded by federal community development grants. And on all 3, the materials sourced and billed to the city were not the materials actually installed. The difference, cheaper steel, lower-grade concrete, had been pocketed. The savings ran to just under $2.3 million across the 3 projects. My husband's father sat on the city's development oversight board. He had for 11 years. I want to be honest about how I felt when I understood the full picture. I wasn't shocked. That's the part that scared me most. I just felt this cold, clarifying recognition. Like when you're looking at a structural drawing and you suddenly see where the whole thing is going to fail. You don't panic, you just know. I didn't say anything. I kept having dinner with him. I kept sitting across from him while he talked about the Riverside Phase 2 bid, about the gala, about whether we should redo the kitchen. I smiled at the right times. I asked questions that sounded like wifely interest and were actually due diligence. I called my friend Okoya. She was a civil litigator in Seattle, someone I'd known since grad school, someone completely outside my husband's orbit, and I told her what I'd found. She didn't panic either. She said, "Don't touch anything. Don't move anything. Don't give him any reason to look at you differently. And get me copies." Getting copies was the part that required patience I didn't know I had. The project files I needed were on the company server, which I could only view, but I was still listed as an authorized consultant on 2 of the projects, which meant I could request printed material compilations for reference review without raising flags. Over 6 weeks, I made 4 such requests. I kept everything. I kept it at Okoya's address in Seattle. There were 2 things I also needed from the physical office: a set of original vendor invoices from 2021 that predated the current filing system, and a specific email thread that had been printed and stored in a locked cabinet in my husband's home office because he didn't trust the server with certain things. He was right not to. The vendor invoices I got during a Saturday when he was golfing and his office manager, a quiet man named Felix who'd worked for the company for 8 years and who had always treated like a person instead of furniture, accidentally left the archive room unlocked while he went to deal with a delivery. I was in and out in 11 minutes. I photographed everything on my phone. I put everything back. The email thread took longer. My husband kept the cabinet locked with a key that lived on his personal keychain, but there was a second key. I'd seen it once, years ago, when a locksmith had come to make a spare during a remodel. My husband had put that spare somewhere in the house and promptly forgotten about it, the way you forget about things when you've decided you're the kind of person who never loses anything important. I found it in the 3rd week of October, in a ceramic dish on the top shelf of the hall closet, underneath a warranty card for a refrigerator we'd replaced in 2020. It had been there the whole time. I made a copy at the hardware store 2 days later and returned the original to the dish. The email thread was everything Okoye needed. It was a direct conversation between my husband and a procurement manager at the materials supplier, discussing the substitution explicitly. There were dollar amounts. There were dates. There was a message where my husband wrote, "Make sure the inspection copies match what we submitted. The rest is between us." I photographed every page. My hands were completely steady. Around this time, something else happened that I hadn't planned for. My mother-in-law called me for lunch. Just the 2 of us, which was unusual. She was a measured woman, someone who expressed care through practical actions rather than words, and she'd always been carefully neutral on the subject of my marriage. But over salads she couldn't really eat, she said. "I've been watching him with you for 6 years. I think you know what I'm going to say." I told her I did. She didn't ask me what I'd found. She didn't offer to help. She just covered my hand with hers for a moment and said, "Be careful with the timing." She was right about that. Timing was everything. Okoye had been in contact with an attorney in Phoenix who specialized in federal contract fraud, a woman named Helen, who I never met in person, only spoke to by phone, always from a coffee shop or a park, never from the house. Helen said what we had was substantial, but that the documentation needed to be in the right hands in the right sequence, because if my husband got wind of an investigation before certain records were secured, he had the kind of connections that could make things complicated. She helped me understand something I hadn't fully considered. As his spouse, I had a legal interest in marital assets. Arizona is a community property state. Whatever was in our joint accounts, our joint investments, the equity in the house, half of it was mine by law. But in a federal fraud case, assets can be frozen pending investigation. If I waited too long, I might walk away with my rights and nothing to exercise them on. So I moved carefully and quickly at the same time. Over 8 weeks, I made a series of withdrawals from our joint account. Nothing that triggered automatic alerts. Always under $10,000. Always with the reason I'd constructed in advance if he ever asked. He never asked. He didn't actually know what was in that account. He paid a business manager to know things like that. I moved the funds to an account I'd opened in my name only at a credit union in Tempe, using my maiden name. I had never legally changed my name. I just used his socially at his preference. That turned out to matter. I also quietly contacted the licensing board and confirmed that the engineering work I had documented contributing to the 4 commercial developments, with dates, project numbers, and my original calculation files, could be registered retroactively under my license number. It took paperwork. It took 3 weeks. But it meant that on paper in the permanent record, I was the engineer of record on projects worth $340 million. Not engineering support, not a footnote. My name, my credentials, mine. I told my husband I was going to visit my sister in Portland for a week. He said that was fine. He was distracted. There was some noise about the city reviewing contract procedures, a routine audit he didn't seem too concerned about. He kissed me on the cheek and told me to say hi to her. I drove to Portland. I actually did stay with my sister for 2 days, which grounded me in a way I hadn't expected. She'd known something was wrong for years. She said that every time I talked about my life, I spoke about his work, his plans, his calendar. Never mine. On the 3rd day, Okoye filed the documentation with the FBI field office in Phoenix. Helen submitted a parallel complaint to the Federal Contracting Authority. Between them, they had everything. The invoices, the photographs, the email thread, the pattern of substitution across 3 projects, the connection to the oversight board. My husband found out in a way I'll never fully know the details of, but based on what his assistant told Felix and what Felix eventually told me, the federal agents came to the office on a Wednesday morning. My father-in-law was contacted by investigators the same afternoon. By Wednesday evening, my husband had called my phone 14 times. I answered on the 15th call, not because I felt anything dramatic about it, I just thought he deserved one conversation. He said it was a misunderstanding. He said I needed to come back and help him sort this out. He said, and this is the part that I've turned over so many times since, you don't understand this world. You need me to navigate it. I said, you're right that I've spent 6 years not understanding. I'm done with that now. I hung up and turned my phone face down and watched the rain on my sister's kitchen window for a long time. The divorce was filed 3 weeks later. Because of the federal investigation, asset division was complex and slow, but Helen had anticipated that. The funds I'd moved were mine. My legal half moved legally, documented correctly. The house went into proceedings. I didn't fight for it. I didn't want it. What I did want was the credit. In settlement, at Okoye's insistence and with documentation that was now a matter of public record, Whitfield and Crane was required to formally acknowledge my engineering contributions to the 4 projects. It was listed in a court filing. It is searchable. It is permanent. My husband pleaded guilty to federal contract fraud 18 months later. His father resigned from the oversight board. The company dissolved during the investigation. I moved back to Seattle. I didn't start over exactly. I think starting over implies that what came before didn't count. What I did was start from where I actually was, which turned out to be further along than I'd been allowed to believe. I opened a small structural engineering consultancy. Just me and 2 junior engineers I brought on in the 2nd year. We specialize in public infrastructure, bridges, transit stations, pedestrian walkways, the work that connects places that can't reach each other on their own. The badge I left on his desk, the one with just my first name and his last name, I didn't take it when I left. I made one for myself before I left Phoenix. It has my full name on it, both parts. It sits on my desk now, next to my coffee mug, in an office that I lease in my name, in a city I chose, doing work that I can prove. That's what quiet feels like when it's actually yours. I think about Felix a lot. The office manager who left the archive room unlocked that Saturday. He didn't know what he was doing for me. He was just dealing with a delivery. But that's how it tends to work. The small, accidental things become the hinges that everything else swings on. What my husband never understood was that systems built on dishonesty don't fail dramatically. They fail quietly, through ordinary moments, through unlocked doors and forgotten keys in ceramic dishes and a wife who finally started listening the way an engineer listens. He thought control was the same thing as strength. A lot of people make that mistake. He controlled the server permissions, the credit, the narrative at dinner parties. And he confused that control for power. But real power doesn't need to erase someone else's name to feel legitimate. What he had was fragile. I just didn't know that until I looked at it clearly. There's something I want to say about the 4 months I spent documenting everything, because people sometimes ask, weren't you angry? Didn't you want to confront him, expose him, make a scene? And the honest answer is no, not once. What I felt was something closer to clarity. When you've spent 6 years being told that your instincts don't apply, that you don't understand how the world works, there's something almost calm about realizing that your instincts were right the whole time. I wasn't reckless with that calm. I was careful with it. I treated it like a structural load, something to be distributed correctly, not dumped all at once. That kind of discipline, the ability to feel something completely and still act deliberately, I don't think I was born with it. I think it built up slowly, over years of doing precise work in a field where imprecision kills people. Engineers don't get to be sloppy. A mistake in a load calculation doesn't announce itself. It waits. I had spent a decade training myself to catch things before they failed. It turned out that same training applied to my own life. What my husband did was wrong, not complicated. Wrong, not morally ambiguous, just wrong. He took public money. He put his name on work that wasn't his. He used proximity to power to make sure no one looked too closely. The consequences he faced were the direct result of choices he made across years with full awareness. I didn't cause his downfall. I just stopped absorbing it. I think about the version of me who stayed, who kept being engineering support, who let her license sit unused and her name disappear from her own work. That version wasn't weak. She was surviving the only way she knew how at the time. But survival isn't the same as living, and there came a point where I had to choose which one I was doing. Okoye asked me once, after everything was filed, whether I felt like I'd won. I thought about it for a while. I said I felt like I'd finally told the truth. About the projects, about the fraud, and about myself. About what I was actually capable of when I stopped letting someone else define the ceiling. My name is on those projects now, permanently. That's not revenge. That's the record correcting itself. And I'll take that over winning any day.